Welcome to the Idea Climbing Podcast. Today, we're discussing how to personally and professionally develop yourself to become a great podcaster. My guest is Junaid Ahmed. Junaid is the founder of Humble Zone and creator of Home Studio Mastery, designed to teach you how to build your home studio. He has 2 decades of video production experience, as well as designing websites and apps focused on a systematic process and seamless user experience. He provides podcasters, speakers, and content creators with a comprehensive plan for their studio equipment, lighting, and layout. We dive into topics including how to best get started in podcasting, how to decide on and find a niche market for your podcast, tips for being a great podcast guest, and how to get comfortable being one, and other golden nuggets of advice. You're going to love this show. Junaid, thank you for making time to be here for the Idea Climbing Podcast. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Mark. I'm super excited to be here. Honored to speak with you and share what I've learned over the years.
And I'd love to jump into, before we jump into the strategies, as far as using podcasting as a personal development tool. I haven't heard it said so eloquently before. I absolutely love it. Before we get into some of the tips, the tricks, the strategies, things like that, what's your story? How did you discover that?
You know, I've been a creator for many, many years. I started from creating flyers for my uncle's business using Microsoft Word over 30 years ago. And as I grew into designing, graphic design, mobile app design, I just found myself creating. And it wasn't until 2005 that I discovered podcasting, which was like, this is pretty cool. But I didn't really get into it till 2012 when a friend of mine said, "Hey, I want to start a podcast." I was like, "Hey, me too." So I ended up starting a podcast with two of my uh, friends. We launched a podcast which contained of only 4 episodes because the technology wasn't there. This is back in 2012, and then I kept wanting to go back and do it, but I just didn't have the drive till I read the book Crushing It by Gary Vaynerchuck. And he said, just go ahead and document your journey. Whatever it is that you're going through, you're going to find the stories. You're going to find value in it. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to start podcasting for my sake, for documenting the journey of becoming a podcaster, documenting a journey of becoming a beekeeper and all the different hobbies that I had when I first got started. So it's been really elevating because when you empty your mind and when you put stuff down on paper, when you put stuff down in an audio note, you're you're releasing space in your brain to do other things, and that's how you start developing your personality.
So talk about it a little more. Let's define what do you mean by using podcasting as a self-improvement or self-development tool? What does that mean to you?
So, for example, when I was going to college, English composition specifically, my teacher said, just free write. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, just write whatever comes to your mind. But I'm like, nothing is coming to my mind. And she's like, exactly, that's the point. Just write. Because she's just trying to get me to write anything at all, free write, to empty your mind. Because as you start writing, initially it's going to be all gobbledygook, but then over time it's going to get refined. And then I use audio or podcasting as the same perspective because the more you speak, the clearer you get over time. And then as you're recording these episodes, you get the opportunity to go back and listen to, hey, how did I just do as I just recorded this episode? Now, as we've seen athletes, we've seen cyclists and whatnot, they record every run they do, every ride they do, they're recording that. So you can look back at the data, like, hey, how am I doing this? How did I run this past ride versus how can I do it better? So same thing goes with podcasting. As you're recording yourself speaking about whatever topic it is, you're just going to get better as you do more of it. And from that perspective, I think it helped me develop my speaking voice, my ability to tell a topic or talk about a topic or teach something that I was struggling with.
So when you were getting started and from that experience, what advice would you have for new aspiring or new-ish podcasters as far as interview style and pulling genius out of people and learning? What advice would you have? Because not everyone can be a good interviewer.
No, it's that's the hardest thing to become a good interviewer. You got to be able to articulate what you're speaking with. And to be able to do that, you want to first start out as a solo podcast. So when I started my podcast, it was solo podcast. It was just me talking about what I was going through as I'm going through the beekeeping journey, as I'm started to, the bees are coming, or, I was getting into beekeeping. I'm building the equipment. Now I'm installing the bees in the hive, tending to them. So I'm talking about all of these different aspects. And the more I did that, the more I understood how to tell a story. But it wasn't still as refined as I wanted it to be. So what I did is I started inviting people that I already knew. My friends, my colleagues. I'm like, hey, come talk to me on the podcast. Let's have a conversation. And the more I did that, especially people that I already knew, were more comfortable with people that you already know. It's very hard to talk to somebody brand new unless you have topics that you're passionate about. So, for example, if I were to talk to somebody about let's say, Top Gun, and Top
Mhm.
Gun is their favorite movie, immediately we're going to hit it off because we have that same we're both on the same page. It's almost like I mentioned this yesterday. If somebody plays the song Thriller by Michael Jackson, we all already know the exact moves. Like, everybody's gonna do this hand gesture because we've gone through that. It's a muscle memory now, right? If you see a QR code, what are you gonna do? You're gonna pull out your phone, scan that QR code. So again, when you are coming from a talking about a topic that you're both passionate about, it's a lot easier to talk to somebody new as opposed to talking to somebody new and you have no idea where you're going to start.
I love the idea of finding that common ground or something they're passionate about. What other tips do you have for interview for again newish or aspiring podcasters? What other things have you learned about doing good interviews? What are some tips and tricks in that arena?
One way to be a really good interviewer is to know who you're going to be interviewing. Right? We've seen some really good examples of that. If you've seen Simon Sinek interview somebody or being interviewed, or I've seen Trevor Noah being interviewed. Jimmy Fallon is a great interviewer, right? They do the research of who are they talking to. And if you, for example, every once in a while, if you're on YouTube and you're going to go down a rabbit hole of watching all the interviews that, let's say, Tony Stark or Robert Downey Jr. did when Iron Man was coming out. Everybody kind of knows who the person is. And it goes to show how much research have you done as an interviewer to understand, hey, what kind of questions can I talk to them, ask them about, and go deep into, because the more you know about the person, the more you'll know what questions have not been asked by this person to this person, and then you can then really refine how well you do on that interview.
Let's take a step back from the interview. What suggestions do you have for finding good guests? And not just anyone, but actual good guests. What suggestions do you have in that arena?
Great question, Mark. See, a good guest is only as good as the topic that you're going to come and talk about, because people all over the world, we have ton of learned experiences, and it all comes down to, hey, what is the purpose for the podcast episode that I'm creating? And based on this purpose, does this person fit in that way? Are they going to deliver good value to the question that I have for them? So I think it all comes down to the main topic. So if you already have decided, hey, I'm going to be talking about, and this is an example that comes up all the time, basket weaving underwater, right?
Yes.
And if you talk about that specific topic, well, you're going to find very specific people and their techniques on how calming it is to weave baskets underwater water because everything just flows. So again, it all comes down to, hey, what's the focus of the podcast? What are you going to be talking about? And who's the target audience that you're curating these questions for so that not only are they getting value out of it, but you're also getting value out of this conversation, as well as the guest who's taken time out to speak on there is getting a ton of value as well.
How talk about finding your niche. How niche should you get? I mean, there's marketing and then there's content marketing and then there's copywriting and or sales. There's so many things you could talk about. How niche do you
Hmm.
think people should get?
They should get as niche as they can because there's 8 billions of us in the world, and every single person, even if they're twins, have totally different stories and journeys on how they grow up. And that's specific to who you are. The more niche you get, the more relatable you become to the people uh, that might want to follow you or that might want to learn from that lived experience. Because, for example, I'm a father of 4 kids, so anytime I speak about something, I'm always mentioning my kids. I'm always bringing them up, and I'm always looking at things from the perspective of being a dad. So people that start resonating with me are again also dads. They're also, they also have kids. They also understand the value that I'm bringing because being a father. So that again, even though I'm very niche, but if you look overall, people are gonna pull from it based on where their mindset is and how they see being a parent as well.
And you had mentioned to me you found your business niche because of podcasting and the self-development journey. Could you explain
Yeah.
what happened to you? How did you find that? How did that happen?
Oh my God. So I've been a tech enthusiast for many, many years. And I bought my very first camera for $1 when I was about 11 years old. As a film camera. And ever since then, I've been, a photographer, a filmmaker. Now, during the pandemic, I've already been a photographer and I've been making films and short films and whatnot for a very, very long time. But as the pandemic hit, number one, I had already been podcasting. So I was not really in front of the camera, but I was having conversations with people on the other side, remotely and whatnot. But as the pandemic hit, I was able to bring in my photography and filmmaking into my stage and creating my own stage around it. And as people saw me, as they saw my video quality, they kept asking, "Hey, what camera are you using?" And I would tell them, "Well, I'm using this camera. Here's my light settings. Here are my other settings. Here's the microphone." And they'd stop me and they're like, "No, no, no. I just want to know what camera you have." Right. And then they would go buy the camera, come back to me like, "Hey, I bought the camera, but I still don't see the look that you've created." I'm like, "Well, you didn't let me finish because you can't just make cake with flour or just chocolate chips. You need all of those things to jive together. You need all those things to mix in together. The variables are very important for it to come out the right way, those cookies." So as I was explaining this to people, people were like, "Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Can you help me?" Right. So I started helping people and I formed the business Home Studio Mastery during the pandemic because people started seeing what I was able to accomplish for myself and they wanted the same kind of results.
And back to the self-development side, as far as starting a podcast, there's so many reasons to do it. I know it ranges from there's the curiosity to the other end where, oh, it's a business play. I'm just going to invite potential clients and pitch them, or I'm establishing myself as a thought leader. Do you have a preference or from your experience, how to decide what topics to pick? I mean, do you think personal development is better than the business niche, or is it a thought leader is better? How do you know what kind of podcast to even have?
That's a very good question in that you're trying to make sense for yourself, right? As you're starting your podcast. Hey, why should I even start a podcast? What is it going to do for me? And all of those reasons are really good. Business, using it for business, using it for lead gen, using it for audience growth. Like all of those are great aspects, but that also means that you're really good at speaking in front of the camera. It also means that you're really good at going on stages and telling people what to do, and they do it exactly what they do. For example, Alex Hermosi did not have a podcast till just recently. And this guy's been crushing it for the past, 3, 4 years. So what's his journey look like? What did he do before he decided he wants to start a podcast? So there has to be certain growth within you, within your business acumen to say, okay, now this makes sense for me to start a podcast. So from all those perspectives, you want to think about, okay, what's the easiest thing that I can go and do? If
Mhm.
that's a podcast, then go do the podcast because it's going to help you grow your authority. It's going to help you grow your mindset, and you're going to attract people that are going to be like, oh my God, this is so powerful. A really prime example is of my friend RJ Ahmed. His podcast is called Interview with Entrepreneurs. He's brought on some really top notch people on his podcast, and I'm not sure what season it is he's on, but you can see literal growth of his setup over the years too, because he was hungry to go get it. He knew the people, he was connected to people, and he was also serving in a way. So that helped him not only grow his brand and his podcast, but he was also able to create an agency around others, around helping others launch their podcast. So again, it all comes down to, hey, which path do you want to go to? And it could also be if you think it's too hard to start a podcast, maybe you want to stick to the guesting route. Maybe you just guest as much as you can, and then you start seeing the value, and then find the right team that can then help you launch a podcast. Because when I first started my podcast, I was like, oh my God, this is so much work. I didn't know how much work was involved. And as a podcaster, there's a ton of different variables. There's 10 different things that we're doing when this conversation part is just only one part, one
Mhm.
of the 10 things that you have to do. So again, looking at all of that, you want to, as somebody who wants to start out, you know, experiment or just try it out. Hey, try out with a guesting route. Try out with, maybe you want to do a 10 episode short podcast that's going to talk about who you are and what you do as a business.
I love the guesting route. I think that's a great way because you had mentioned getting comfortable on camera, and I know with myself too, guesting helps you get comfortable on camera. When it comes to guesting, though, same thing as podcasting. The question would be, what makes a good guest? If someone say, "Oh, I'll dip my toes in the water with guesting," what kind of
hmm
things do they need to know about being a good guest, if not a great guest?
One thing that I would recommend is to go check out Podcasting Made Simple Live. It's an event that happens every quarter, and the guests that come on there or the speakers that come on here are focusing on podcast guesting and podcast hosting, and they talk about what it takes to be a really good guest. So I would recommend go check out podmatch.com/podcast because all the speakers that go and speak at this quarterly event are speaking to podcast guests and teach you the things you want to think about as being a really good guest.
How long do you think it takes somebody that's newer? How long do you think it takes them to get comfortable? Because you can tell, I know when I watch podcasts or any interviews, but we'll stick with podcasts, you can just tell some people are comfortable on camera. There's an
hmm
ease about them. But if someone's thinking, "God, I'm not that comfortable yet," is it amount of time? Is it amount of guest appearances? Is it amount of your own podcast? How long does it take and how do you get more comfortable on camera?
That's an awesome question, and I want to quote Brendan Kumarasamy, who's an amazing guest. He's an amazing speaker, And believe it or not, he did over 400 speeches in 4 years in when he was going to undergrad. Now, you might be thinking that's insane, but if you look at somebody who's an athlete, how many times do they have to practice to then go to play to play the game, right? So it all comes down to practice. How many times are you recording video, talking in front of the camera, being in Zoom meetings and being very present? And how many times are you doing this actively on a daily, weekly basis? Because the more you do that, the more comfortable you're going to become.
So once you get
So
a, go ahead.
simplest is the more practice you do, the better you will get. So if you're just starting out, guess what? You've already been talking to people, not on camera, right? So bring that personality, bring that calmness when you're on camera, because we don't need to rush anything. We're just having a conversation.
And how about for established podcasters? Because it's up and down, like you said, there's so much that goes along with it. There's so much behind the scenes work.
Yeah.
For those times when maybe they didn't get the right guest or they weren't quite on, what advice do you have to keep on keeping on once you're established? Because it's not always, everything's perfect and I have the best interview and the best guest. What would you tell people to keep on keeping on? How do they do it? How do they stick with it?
Man, to stick with it, you want to be around people who are encouraging, right? When you join a team, a sports team or cycling team, running team, whatever have you, you have people around you that understand these struggles of being an athlete, that understand the struggles of being an entrepreneur, that understand struggles of being a parent, like all of those things, right? So you want to be around people who are always encouraging you and not putting you down. They're always you can do this and you can do this too. So they're always encouraging you. So if you surround yourself with people like that, it becomes a lot easier to do it. As opposed to if you're on the court and your coach is just yelling at you, guess what? You just don't want to do it anymore. So you want to make sure you're surrounding yourself with people that care for you, that are encouraging you, and you're constantly encouraging others as well, putting the one foot in front of the other.
That is awesome. We have covered a lot of ground in a really short period of time. When it comes to podcasting as a personal development tool, whether it's reiterating something you've said or something you haven't touched on yet, if you were going to give some advice and say, you know what, if someone's interested, like I get it, this is a lot of good info. If you were to say, at least do this one thing, at least this one thing to get rolling and to keep it going, what would that one thing be that you would tell people when it comes to podcasting for personal development or podcasting as a whole?
Like what the one thing that I would tell somebody who's looking to get started is to just get started. No matter where you are, no matter what equipment that you think you might need, you don't need any of it. All you need is your smartphone that's in your pocket. Take it out, turn the voice notes on, and start talking. Because that's how I started. My first episode was record on my phone in my car. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to talk about this topic. I don't know what the podcast is going to be like. You start messy, you start ugly. Book by Chris Cremisto's Start Ugly. He's the he's been running Podfest for the past 11 plus years. He wrote the book Start Ugly because when you start ugly, you're just testing out what it looks like. Like imagine the first time you had to make scrambled eggs. I don't even remember the first time I tried to make scrambled eggs because we don't, right? We get better over time. So just get started because as you get started, you'll realize what you're missing and you realize what you're already good at. And then you can tweak it along the way.
This has been excellent. If people want to find you online, what's the best place or places to go?
All right. So to find me online, I'm at Super Junaid on all the platforms. But if you're interested on home studios, check out my book, homestudiobook.com. I'll take you to my site, homestudiomastery.com. and you can find all about me over there. If you want to listen to any of my podcast episodes that I've interviewed over 600 guests on my show, hacksandhobbies.com is the place to go.
Thank you again. This has been a great, Junaid. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely, Mark. Thanks so much for having me, and have an amazing one.
And scene.